It started with a silence that said more than words ever could. A silence so heavy that even the clicking cameras dared not interrupt it. Just moments earlier, Princess Anne had stepped to the podium at Windsor's Commemoration Hall, calm, composed, and carrying an envelope so ordinary it almost seemed out of place. But within that envelope lay the Queen's final wish. And when Anne spoke those words aloud, everything changed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let my memory serve the crown, not the crown serve my memory. The room froze. Reporters didn't move. Courtiers blinked, confused, as if the air itself had thickened. And somewhere across the ocean, Meghan Markle's name began trending again. But this time, it wasn't because of a red carpet appearance or a podcast deal. It was because of a single sentence. The Queen's final wish. Now, let me ask you this. What if that wish wasn't meant for the world at all? What if those words were a quiet warning, meant for one person who'd turned her royal story into a Hollywood production? You see, this wasn't just another royal speech. This was a message wrapped in grief, loyalty, and centuries of unspoken code. And Anne, the Queen's most loyal child, had just broken the code. So let's rewind. Let's go back to where this moment truly began. The late Queen Elizabeth II built her life around duty. Every wave, every smile, every carefully measured word, all in service to something greater than herself. But what the world didn't see was the personal cost. Behind the tiaras and balcony waves was a woman who carried the weight of her family's choices, one by one. And lately, those choices had become complicated. From the tell-all interviews to Netflix contracts, the monarchy's once sacred privacy had become public entertainment. Every emotion turned into a headline. Every gesture turned into a meme. And the Queen, who had spent her life protecting the mystique of the crown, watched as her image was used to sell stories. It hurt her, more than she ever let on. Because for her, monarchy wasn't a brand. It was a bond, an invisible thread tying past and present, life and legacy. And when that bond was broken, she made sure to leave instructions. That's where Anne comes in, and had always been the quiet enforcer. The one who didn't need applause or approval. She worked harder than most royals, stayed scandal-free, and never once played the fame game. To her, duty wasn't glamorous, it was sacred. So when she opened that envelope, that pale, ivory paper bearing her mother's crest, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there. The letter wasn't long. It wasn't grand. But its message was unmistakable. No one must use my life for profit. My story belongs to the crown, not to commerce. It was a queen's confession and command in one. And when Anne decided to share those words publicly, it wasn't out of spite. It was out of love, fierce, protective love for the woman she'd served and adored. But there was another reason too, one she didn't say out loud. A reason with a name. Meghan Markle. Now, pause for a moment. What happens when royal blood and Hollywood ambition collide? When Anne read the Queen's words, "Never use my story for profit," the echoes were obvious. Netflix, Spotify, Oprah, the memoirs, the podcasts. Every ounce of royal experience turned into a commodity. And wasn't naive. She knew what the world would think, that she was taking a shot at the Sussexes. And maybe, just maybe she was. Because ever since Meghan and Harry's dramatic exit, Anne had remained silent, but never supportive. She saw their interviews, their truths, their glossy storytelling. And though she never said a word, her expression in public told a story of its own. Cold, controlled, disappointed. To Anne, the monarchy was built on restraint. And to see that restraint shattered for ratings and brand deals, that was betrayal. So when she read that line, "Let my memory serve the crown, not the crown serve my memory," it hit like thunder. It was the Queen's voice echoing through time, cutting through the noise of documentaries and interviews, saying enough is enough. And the irony? Meghan and Harry had claimed they left the royal family to protect the Queen from the institution. Yet, it was the Queen's own daughter now protecting the monarchy from them. Contradiction or poetic justice? You tell me. But let's go back to that night. The Commemoration Hall at Windsor was packed. Candles flickered. Every royal was there. Charles, Camilla, William, even Kate in black velvet, eyes fixed on Anne. It was supposed to be a quiet remembrance of the Queen's reign. But Anne had different plans. Her speech began softly. My mother was not only a monarch, but a mother to a nation. Then, slowly, she unfolded that paper. The crowd leaned in. Her voice didn't tremble. Her words did the shaking. When my mother spoke of legacy, she said, she never spoke of profit. She spoke of purpose. She said, let my memory serve the crown, not the crown serve my memory. A pause. Then the air broke. William's jaw tightened. Camilla looked down. Charles blinked rapidly, his fingers twitching against the chair. And in that moment, they all knew. This wasn't just a tribute. It was a declaration. A message broadcast from beyond the grave. And though no one mentioned Meghan's name, everyone heard it. It hung in the silence like perfume, faint but undeniable, and stepped away from the podium. No applause. No music. Just stunned quiet. Because everyone understood the subtext. The Queen's final wish wasn't about tradition. It was about control over her story, her legacy, and her image. And it had just been taken back. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. A source close to the palace later revealed that, and had hesitated before going public. She'd reportedly shown the letter to Charles weeks earlier. He was torn. He feared that releasing it would open old wounds, especially with Harry. And insisted. She said, if we stay silent, her memory becomes merchandise. That line reportedly silenced the room. Because whether they admitted it or not, every royal knew the Queen's image was still being sold, streamed, and discussed worldwide. And the more it was used, the less sacred it became. And wasn't about to let that happen. Her speech wasn't just a tribute. It was an act of reclamation. A daughter taking back what her mother had built. But here's where things get dark. Not everyone in the palace supported her move. Some feared it would escalate tensions with the Sussexes. Others whispered that it would make the monarchy seem out of touch, clinging to an outdated sense of control in a modern world. Yet, and didn't flinch. Because in her eyes, this wasn't about relevance. It was about reverence. And that made her dangerous to those who'd profited from the Queen's image. Within hours of the speech, reactions exploded. Headlines read, "And subtle attack on Meghan?" Social media split in two. Some praised her courage, calling her the true protector of the crown. Others accused her of hypocrisy, arguing that the monarchy itself had long monetized the Queen's face, from coins to souvenirs. And didn't respond. She didn't explain, defend, or elaborate. She didn't need to. Because the message had already done its job. It forced a question into the public's mind, one that wouldn't go away. Had the Queen's final words been aimed directly at Meghan Markle? And if so, what else was in that letter? Because here's the twist. According to insiders, the line in red wasn't the only sentence. The rest of the Queen's letter remains unseen, locked away in a private archive at Windsor Castle. Only and Charles and one senior aide know. She carried it back to her private sitting room. No aides, no cameras, just silence and the ticking of the old grandfather clock the Queen had once loved. For minutes, she stared at it, unsure if she was ready. Because deep down, she already knew the Queen never wrote without purpose. Every line was intentional, every word a legacy. When and finally broke the seal, she exhaled slowly, almost a prayer. The scent of the paper, faintly lavender, filled the air. Her eyes moved across the first line. My dearest, and it began. If you are reading this, then my voice is gone, but my duty remains. And blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. She continued reading. I have watched the world change, often for the better, sometimes for the worse. But what has pained me most is the thought that my story, our story, could one day be sold rather than served. Promise me, and that my memory will serve the crown, not the crown serve my memory. Anne's breath caught. There it was, the same line she would later read aloud before the world. But the next paragraph was the one that chilled her. I fear a time will come when fame will tempt even those bound by blood. When the private shall become public, and devotion shall become a brand. If that time comes, remind them who we are. We serve. We do not sell. And set the letter down, her fingers trembling. The Queen wasn't simply leaving behind a wish. She was leaving a warning. Imagine being in Anne's place, reading your mother's handwriting, hearing her voice echo in every sentence, and realizing that the words weren't just about the past, they were about the present, and immediately knew who the Queen had meant. The timing was unmistakable. The Queen's health had begun to decline around the same time Harry and Meghan's media ventures were making headlines. The Netflix deal, the podcasts, the interviews that peeled back royal life like a reality show. The Queen had smiled through it all in public, but privately, she had confided in and more than anyone else. She worries, and once told a close friend, that the meaning of monarchy is being lost in the noise. That worry, it seemed, had found its way into the letter, and read it again and again until the ink blurred. She couldn't tell if her tears came from grief or fury, but something changed in her then. A sense of purpose sharpened, a clarity that only duty could bring. Because this wasn't just about honoring her mother's wish. It was about protecting the very institution her mother had spent 70 years defending. And Anne, ever the soldier's daughter, decided to act. She placed the letter back into its envelope and locked it inside a mahogany box bearing the royal seal. Then she called one person, her brother, now King Charles III. Charles answered from Clarence House. His voice was tired, soft, almost wary. He'd been dealing with endless briefings, state matters, and the unending shadow of the Sussex problem. When Anne told him she had their mother's private letter, he went silent. Then, quietly, "You've read it?" "Yes." And hesitated. She knew Charles. She knew this would happen. She wrote about it. There was a pause, then a deep sigh. Of course she did. And could hear the exhaustion behind his words, the weight of both crown and conscience. She was very clear, and continued. She didn't want her story commercialized. She asked that we preserve her legacy, not market it. Charles rubbed his forehead. "And you think she was referring to them?" And didn't answer immediately. But Charles knew. He didn't need her to say it. For the next week, the siblings met privately several times. No aides, no advisors, just the two of them and the letter. They read it together in silence. At one point, Charles looked away, his eyes glistening. "She saw this coming," he whispered. "She saw all of it," and nodded. "Then we must act as she would have wanted." Charles leaned back, conflicted. "You know how it will look, and the press will call it an attack. The Sussexes will see it as provocation. She didn't ask us to please anyone," and replied firmly. "She asked us to protect her legacy, and I intend to." Her tone left no room for argument. But there was something Anne hadn't yet told Charles, something she had found at the bottom of the envelope. A small folded note in the Queen's unmistakable handwriting. Only 5 words. "Play the recording if needed," and froze when she first saw it. What recording? She called the royal archivist again, asking discreetly if any final audio diaries had been catalogued. The archivist hesitated, then said, "Ma'am, there was a private recording made in early 2021. The Queen requested it be sealed until you or the King requested access." Anne's heart raced. She asked to hear it. Within hours, she was sitting in a private study, headphones on, the lights dimmed. Then came her mother's voice, gentle, wise, unmistakable. "I have lived long enough to know that truth is not what people tell you on camera. It is what they hold sacred in silence. If the day comes when silence is mocked, let those who remember my reign remind the world. Our worth is in our service, not our stories." And pressed pause. Her eyes filled again. Her mother had spoken as though she knew this day would come. That night, and didn't sleep. By morning, she knew what she had to do. The letter couldn't stay hidden. The world needed to hear the Queen's wish. When she presented the letter at Windsor's commemoration event, some of her advisors tried to stop her. "Ma'am, perhaps this should remain private," one said cautiously. Anne's reply was short. It was private for too long. And so, she stood before the world, holding that same letter that had once trembled in her hands. She didn't read it word for word, only the line that mattered most. "Let my memory serve the crown, not the crown serve my memory." That line would echo across nations. It would reignite debates about royalty, duty, and exploitation. It would draw fury from some, admiration from others. But most importantly, it would fulfill the Queen's final command. Because Anne knew her mother's message wasn't just to her family. It was to the entire world. It was a plea not to turn service into spectacle. But what Anne didn't realize was that by reading that line aloud, she was unlocking something much bigger, a storm her mother had anticipated but never wanted unleashed. Because the letter was only half the story. The recording, the Queen's actual voice, contained something far more explosive. And when Anne decided to reveal that too, The royal silence would shatter forever. But that is where things would take a shocking turn no one was prepared for. It didn't take long for the whispers to turn into headlines. Was Princess and aiming at Meghan? Royal family divided over Queen's final words. Serve, not sell. The message that stung in Montecito. Because make no mistake, and statement wasn't floating in a vacuum. It landed squarely in a world where Meghan Markle had built an empire around one thing, her royal story. And deep down, everyone knew it. Let's rewind to where the real trigger began. When Meghan and Harry left the royal family in 2020, they spoke of freedom. Freedom from duty. Freedom from control. Freedom to tell their truth. But soon after that tearful interview with Oprah, the one that split the world into believers and skeptics, the couple found themselves at the center of a billion-dollar industry. Netflix documentaries, Spotify podcasts, memoirs, merchandise, brand partnerships. Every aspect of their royal life became a marketable asset. Every memory turned into a story. Every photo became a product. And the irony? The Queen was still alive when much of it began. You can imagine how that must have felt to her, watching from Windsor as the grandson she loved turned her family into content. The monarchy, an institution that thrived on mystery, was suddenly on global display. There were scenes from Frogmore, personal text messages, emotional reenactments, even private footage from the royal wedding. It wasn't storytelling. It was exposure. And for a monarch who'd lived by the creed, never complain, never explain, it was devastating, and had seen it all unfold in real time. She never said anything publicly. That wasn't her way, but she watched in silence as Meghan and Harry signed multi-million-dollar contracts while still carrying royal titles. One palace aide described Anne's reaction in simple terms. She was furious. Not because of the money, because of the disrespect. Because for Anne, it wasn't about wealth. She herself worked tirelessly, attending hundreds of engagements a year, rarely taking a day off, and yet she had never turned her position into profit. Duty wasn't something to be sold. It was something to be lived. And that's what made Meghan's moves feel like betrayal. When the Netflix trailer dropped, with dramatic music, slow-motion shots, and Meghan whispering, "No one knows the full truth," and reportedly turned off her television halfway through. She didn't need to see the rest, as one insider put it, and said she'd seen enough truth for one lifetime. Now let's look at this from another angle, from Meghan's perspective. Because this wasn't just greed or vanity. At least, not entirely. Meghan saw storytelling as power. She believed she was reclaiming her voice, breaking the silence that royalty demanded. But here's the contradiction, and it's what made and so livid. You can't demand privacy and simultaneously monetize your life story. You can't claim trauma while scripting it for a global streaming service. You can't say you escaped the system while selling subscriptions based on your time within it. And saw that contradiction as the collapse of everything the monarchy stood for. And to her, the Queen's letter was not just poetic, it was prophetic. A preemptive strike against exactly what Meghan had done. Let's break down what Meghan built. The Spotify deal was worth around $20 million. A podcast titled Archetypes that explored labels that hold women back. It launched with fanfare, featuring celebrities like Serena Williams and Mariah Carey. But behind the scenes, production was chaotic. Staff turnover was high. Harry contributed little. In the end, Spotify executives reportedly called the couple grifters. The partnership dissolved quietly, leaving behind an uncomfortable truth. Storytelling wasn't enough when the story felt rehearsed. Then came Netflix, a $100 million deal, a 6-part series documenting their truth. Viewers tuned in, expecting vulnerability. What they got instead was polished pain, emotional performances spliced with slow zooms, scenic drone shots, and pointed narratives about racism, betrayal, and victimhood. It was part documentary, part soap opera, and it sold. But the cost? The Queen's private world was now content. Her family dynamics were a script. And while millions streamed and sat in silence, stewing, perhaps, but waiting, because she knew something the world didn't. Her mother's letter existed. And that letter, even in death, would speak louder than any Netflix production. Still, Meghan's ventures didn't stop there. There were books, speeches, and even rumors of a new memoir in the works. Every move seemed to circle back to her time as a royal, her pain, her experiences, her image beside the Queen. Photos that once symbolized duty became emotional props. Moments of service became marketing. One photo in particular, Meghan curtsying to the Queen for the first time, resurfaced in the docuseries. Meghan laughed as she reenacted it for the cameras, exaggerating the motion. The world gasped, and, according to reports, looked physically ill when she saw it. Because that wasn't comedy. That was sacrilege. The Queen had lived through wars, political upheavals, and family scandals. But this? Her own granddaughter-in-law mocking tradition for entertainment? It was more than it could stand. That's when she decided the letter wouldn't stay private forever. Let's pause here. Ask yourself this. What would you do if someone you loved left you a message, one that warned about the very betrayal you were witnessing? Would you keep it secret? Or would you honor it, even if it meant igniting a global firestorm? And chose the latter. Because as much as the public adored the Queen's image, few understood how deeply that image meant to her. The Queen saw her role as sacred, not celebrity, but service. And she feared that after her death, others would use her likeness not to inspire, but to profit. She was right. Even after her passing, Meghan and Harry's projects continued to reference her, her leadership, her influence, her disappointment in how they were treated. The Queen's legacy had become a backdrop for branding. And that's when and finally acted, reading that line in public, reclaiming her mother's words, and forcing the world to confront what the Queen had foreseen. But behind the scenes, the fallout was immediate. Meghan's PR team was blindsided. Within hours of Anne's speech, crisis calls began. Publicists scrambled to spin the moment. Officially, Meghan remained silent. Unofficially, insiders say she was livid. She felt ambushed, one Hollywood source revealed. She believed Anne was targeting her, using her mother's memory to humiliate her. But Meghan's silence only made things worse. Online commentators, royal experts, and journalists connected the dots. They compared Anne's words, "Let my memory serve the crown," with Meghan's Netflix monologues about telling her truth. The contrast couldn't be sharper. And spoke of legacy. Meghan spoke of leverage. And embodied duty. Meghan embodied publicity. The lines were drawn. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, the Queen's letter was no longer just a relic. It was evidence. Evidence that the late monarch had seen this coming and tried to prevent it. Senior courtiers whispered that if the letter had been made public sooner, the Sussex media empire might never have taken off. Others feared it was too late, that the brand of monarchy itself had already been cheapened. But Anne didn't care about damage control. She cared about message control. And her message was clear. The Queen's story belonged to the monarchy, not to Netflix, Spotify, or Hollywood. And yet, one question lingered, gnawing at the edges of the palace's calm. If that letter had been meant for Anne's eyes alone, why had the Queen also mentioned a recording, a hidden audio diary sealed inside the archives? What did that recording contain? Because the letter had been powerful. But the recording, the Queen's actual voice, could be devastating, especially if she said names, and had already heard part of it. But the public hadn't. Not yet. And if Anne decided to release that recording, to let the Queen speak for herself, it wouldn't just expose Meghan's behavior. It would rewrite the narrative entirely. Because rumors were spreading fast. Whispers that the Queen had directly addressed the commercialization of royal service and had mentioned a specific family member. One who forgot that grace is greater than grievance. Was that phrase directed at Meghan? The palace wouldn't confirm and wouldn't comment. But one thing was clear, this was far from over. In fact, this was just the beginning of the storm. Because while Meghan's team tried to repair her image and was preparing to reveal something even more shocking, a revelation that would leave no doubt about what and who the Queen's final message truly meant. And when Anne finally stepped forward again, with the Queen's recording in her hand, what came next would change royal history forever. And no one, not even Meghan Markle herself, saw it coming. It was late evening at Clarence's house. The curtains were drawn, the fire crackled, and the faint smell of cigars lingered in the air. King Charles sat alone, staring at a single letter on his desk, the same letter that had shaken Anne to her core. The Queen's handwriting was still elegant, still controlled. Even in death, her words carried authority. But now, those words were an impossible weight. Let my memory serve the crown, not the crown serve my memory. For Charles, it wasn't just a wish, it was a demand. a demand that placed him right in the center of a storm he had spent years trying to calm. Because that one line, that single sentence, had the power to pit him against his own son. Charles had always been a man torn between tradition and emotion. He understood duty, but he also knew guilt. The Queen's legacy loomed over him like a shadow, graceful yet unyielding. He'd waited 70 years to wear the crown. But what the world didn't see was how much that weight had cost him. The loneliness, the constant public scrutiny, the mistakes. And now, just as he was trying to build unity in a fractured family, his sister had thrown a lit match into a room full of gasoline. Anne's public revelation of the Queen's final wish had ignited everything. The monarchy was once again front-page news, not for celebration, but for confrontation. And at the heart of it was Meghan Markle. The morning after Anne's speech, Charles's private secretary entered his study with an armful of newspapers. Each front page screamed a different version of the same story. Princess Anne's subtle swipe at the Sussexes. Queen's final wish targets Meghan's Hollywood empire. Royal silence broken, family divided. Charles didn't speak. He just flipped through the pages, expressionless. But his fingers trembled ever so slightly. Finally, he looked up. "Has Harry called?" "No, sir." Charles nodded, unsurprised. Of course Harry hadn't called. Ever since Anne's statement, the tension between father and son had grown unbearable. Harry felt betrayed. Meghan felt targeted. And the palace, once again, was caught between compassion and control. Behind the palace gates, the debate had already begun. Some advisors urged Charles to stay silent. "Your Majesty, engaging now would give credence to rumors. Best to let the moment pass." Others argued the opposite. "This is your mother's legacy, sir. You must reaffirm her wishes, firmly, publicly." Charles leaned back, listening, but his mind was elsewhere. He could almost hear his mother's voice, calm and resolute, echoing from years past. "Duty is rarely comfortable, Charles, but it is always right." He rubbed his temples. Silence would protect Harry, but truth would protect the Queen. And that was the dilemma. Later that day, he summoned Anne to Clarence's house. She arrived promptly, as always. No nonsense, no entourage. Just her. Charles looked up from his desk as she entered. "You've caused quite the stir, sister." And didn't smile. Mother's words were not meant to rot in a drawer. "I know," Charles said softly. "But the timing is exactly right," and interrupted. "She warned us this would happen. You saw the letter. You heard the recording." Charles exhaled slowly. "Yes, and I also saw what happened after. The backlash, the anger. She didn't write it to please anyone," and said firmly. "She wrote it to remind us who we are." Charles looked at her for a long moment. "You think she meant it as a warning about Meghan?" Anne's expression didn't change. "I don't think. I know." Silence filled the room. Heavy, royal, suffocating. For a moment, Charles considered how his mother might have handled this. She would have stayed silent, perhaps. Let her actions speak. Let the world guess. But Anne wasn't Elizabeth. And neither was he. And deep down, Charles knew something his mother might never have admitted. The monarchy could no longer survive on mystery alone. The world had changed. Transparency was now power. Still, he wasn't ready to risk what little peace remained between him and his son. "I can't go to war with Harry," he said finally. "He's still my child." And crossed her arms. "Then remind him what being your child means." Charles's jaw tightened. He wanted to protest, but she was right. He had been too forgiving, too patient. He'd allowed the monarchy's dignity to be chipped away, one interview at a time. The Oprah special, the docuseries, the memoir spare. Each time, Charles stayed silent, hoping the storm would fade. It never did. And now, his own mother's words were forcing him to choose silence or sovereignty. That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He walked through Buckingham Palace, the corridors dimly lit, the portraits of past monarchs watching him from the walls. Every face seemed to ask the same question: what will you do now? He stopped in front of one portrait, his mother's, painted in her later years. Her eyes seemed alive, as if she were waiting for his answer. He whispered to her, "I won't let them turn you into a story, Mummy. I promise." And that was the moment he decided. He would act, but not with words. He would use power the way the Queen had, quietly, strategically, decisively. The next morning, Charles instructed his communications office to draft a statement. one that appeared neutral but carried a royal warning between the lines. It would praise Anne's commitment to upholding Her Majesty's memory while reaffirming the Crown's ongoing dedication to preserving the dignity of royal legacy. It was subtle, but everyone who read it knew exactly what it meant, especially Meghan, because when that statement hit the news, it became clear that the monarchy was closing ranks. For the first time since the Queen's passing, the Windsors were united, at least outwardly, under a single message. The late Queen's story was off limits. But privately, Charles was wrestling with a deeper pain, because he knew that message would reach Harry too, and it would hurt him. That evening, his phone rang. It was Harry. For a moment, Charles just stared at the screen. His hand hovered over the phone, unsure. Finally, he answered. There was silence on the other end, long, awkward, heavy. Then Harry's voice, quiet but trembling. You could have stopped her, Pa. Charles closed his eyes. It wasn't my place to stop her. It was her mother's letter. You know what it looks like, Harry said bitterly. It looks like you're using her against us. Charles felt his throat tighten. We're not using her, Harry. We're protecting her. Protecting her? Harry snapped. By humiliating my wife. By honoring my mother, Charles said evenly. Silence again. Then Harry's tone softened, almost pleading. You don't understand. We just wanted to tell our side, Charles whispered. And in doing so, you've made her life into your business. There was a click. The line went dead. Charles sat there for a long time, staring into the dark. He'd lost his son long before that call, but now, he'd lost the chance to fix it. The next morning, a private letter was hand-delivered to Windsor. It was addressed to Princess Anne from the king himself. It read, Sister, you were right. Duty cannot bend to comfort. The Queen must be remembered as she lived, in service, not in sale. Proceed as you see fit. You have my support. And that was all Anne needed. Because the moment Charles gave his blessing, she no longer acted as a grieving daughter. She acted as the Crown's enforcer. She had already revealed the Queen's letter. Now, with her brother's consent, she was ready to release something far more powerful. The recording. The Queen's private audio diary had remained locked away since 2021, a voice preserved in time, and had listened to it once in solitude. But this time, she planned to make it public. The decision terrified the palace. Advisors begged her to reconsider. It's too personal, ma'am. Too raw. Anne's response was simple. So was betrayal. Because to her, this wasn't about headlines. It was about legacy, pure and unfiltered. And if Meghan had built her fortune telling her truth, then the Queen's truth deserved to be heard too. The recording, and believed, would silence every question, every rumor, every exploitative echo of the monarchy's private pain. But when she pressed play for the world to hear, what came through that speaker wasn't just history, it was heartbreak. Because the Queen's final words weren't just about preserving dignity. They were about love, regret, and one final plea to her grandson that would shake him, and Meghan, to their core. But before the world could hear it, something unexpected happened. Someone inside the palace tried to stop her. And that single act of defiance would turn Anne's crusade into a full-blown royal war. The firelight danced across the antique portraits of kings and queens who had ruled before, silent witnesses to another royal reckoning. Clarence's house had seen its fair share of history, but what was unfolding within its private drawing room that night was something different, something dangerous. Because this time, the monarchy wasn't deciding the future of a nation. It was deciding how to protect its soul. It was nearly midnight when Anne arrived. No photographers, no entourage, just the soft rumble of her car disappearing behind the palace gates. Charles was already waiting inside, seated by the window, a half-empty glass of scotch resting beside a stack of papers. The Queen's letter lay on top, open, creased, and heavy with meaning. As Anne entered, Charles looked up. His face was tired, drawn, but his eyes were alert. The eyes of a man who knew the decision they were about to make could change the monarchy forever. Edward was there too, quiet and cautious, his expression unreadable. The three of them, the Queen's remaining children, gathered in silence, bound by blood, duty, and now, by her final words. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Anne broke the quiet. Are we agreed? Charles sighed. On what, precisely? And stepped closer, her tone firm. That we act. That we honor Mother's words the way she intended. No more silence. Edward frowned slightly. You mean to go public? Again. Anne's reply was sharp. Not just public. Transparent. We've allowed the family name to be dragged through the mud long enough. She warned us this would happen. Charles took a slow sip of his drink. And what then? We expose our own. Turn a private letter into a weapon. And didn't flinch. Not a weapon. A shield. Her words hung in the air like smoke. That meeting, small, intimate, and unrecorded, would become one of the most whispered about moments in royal history. Insiders later called it the night the crown made its stand, and laid out everything she'd uncovered. The letter, the recording, the Queen's handwritten notes. Each piece, she said, told the same story. A monarch who foresaw the danger of her image being exploited, even by her own. Edward listened silently, hands folded. Charles paced the room, deep in thought. Finally, he turned toward the window, gazing at the glowing lights of London beyond. You realize what this could mean, he murmured. If we do this, there's no going back. Anne's voice softened, but her conviction didn't waver. There's been no going back for a long time. Outside, rain began to fall, light at first, then harder, streaking the glass like tears. Inside, history was being rewritten. Charles set his glass down and faced his sister squarely. You're suggesting we reveal everything? Even the recording? Yes, and said. It's the only way. She wanted her words to be heard. Not filtered, not twisted. Heard. Edward interjected, hesitant. But it could embarrass the family. Stir more division. What if it does more harm than good? And turned to him. You think silence has protected us? Look around, Edward. Every silence we've kept has become someone else's story to sell. Mother knew that. That's why she wrote the letter in the first place. Her words were like iron, calm but cutting. Charles stared at her, his expression shifting from resistance to resignation. For years, he had tried to hold the family together through diplomacy. But Anne's defiance, he knew, came from the same place their mother's strength once had, from truth. You're your mother's daughter, he said softly, and nodded. And that's exactly why I can't ignore this. For the next hour, the three siblings discussed every possible outcome. The fallout from Anne's first public reading had already rippled through the press. Meghan's team was reportedly furious. Harry was refusing calls, and even Palisades were split over what should happen next. But what Anne wanted to reveal now, the existence of the Queen's recording, would ignite a firestorm that could consume them all. Charles understood the stakes. He'd spent decades trying to manage optics, to maintain the monarchy's relevance in a cynical age. This was no longer about image. It was about identity. He looked at, and his voice low. What exactly did she say in the recording? And hesitated. You heard the first part. But there's more. Edward looked up. More, and nodded slowly. Mother didn't just warn about exploitation. She named it. She spoke of how fame can turn family into business. How the line between love and ambition disappears when cameras enter the home. Charles swallowed hard. And she said this, knowing what Harry and Meghan were doing. Anne's gaze held steady. She said it because of them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Charles ran a hand through his hair. God, she knew everything, didn't she? She always did, and said. Then came the hardest part, the question none of them wanted to ask, but all of them were thinking. Edward leaned forward. Do we tell the world what she said, or do we let the past stay buried? Charles closed his eyes. If we tell them everything, we destroy what little trust remains between us and Harry. But if we stay quiet, the Queen's message dies with her. And spoke before he could continue. The monarchy is built on truth and continuity, not on comfort. Harry's hurt will fade. Mother's words must not. Charles didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at the fire, watching the flames twist and flicker. After a moment, he said quietly, Then we'll do it your way. Anne's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. You won't regret it, Charles. He gave a tired smile. I already do. The meeting didn't end with signatures or proclamations. It ended with something far more powerful, a promise. Charles would authorize the release of the Queen's voice recording, but under one condition. It would be presented not as scandal, but as tribute, and would oversee the process personally. No dramatization, no leaks, just the Queen, in her own words. It was a compromise, fragile but necessary. And yet, even as they shook hands on the plan, all three knew what it would unleash once the public heard the Queen speak from beyond the grave. For the first time, The monarchy would face its own reflection, not through the media, not through rumor, but through the voice of its matriarch herself. When and left Clarence's house that night, the rain had stopped. The air was cold, damp, and still. As she stepped into her car, she looked back once more at the palace, the glow of its windows fading behind her. She whispered under her breath, "We're doing it, Mummy, the way you would have wanted." Then she drove off into the London night, the letter resting on the seat beside her. But inside Clarence's house, Charles remained by the fire long after she'd gone. He sat there alone, haunted by one thought. What if this decision, the one made to protect his mother's memory, ended up tearing the family apart for good? A few days later, the palace communications office prepared the statement. It would be simple, elegant, and respectful. In keeping with Her Majesty's enduring wish that service outlive sentiment, the royal family will release a personal message recorded by the late Queen Elizabeth II, a reflection on duty, devotion, and legacy. It sounded harmless. Harmless enough to hide the storm brewing underneath. Because what the world didn't know, not yet, was that this recording didn't just contain a reflection. It contained revelation. And one name. The Queen had spoken directly about a royal she believed had confused fame with purpose. That line alone, once released, would light the fuse that no one, not even, and could put out. Because as the press prepared to air the recording, word leaked that the Queen's voice mentioned betrayal within the family. The internet exploded. Pundits speculated. And Meghan's team went into full crisis mode. And, meanwhile, remained calm, focused. She knew there was no turning back. The letter had been the warning. The speech had been the spark. But the recording? That would be the explosion. And when it was finally played, the Queen's voice would do what no living royal had dared. Name the truth that shattered the illusion of royal unity once and for all. Because what came next would be the reckoning. The silence didn't last long. It never does when Meghan Markle feels cornered. Within hours of the palace's announcement that the Queen's private recording would soon be released, the sleek glass offices of Archewell in Montecito erupted into chaos. Laptops flicked open. Phones rang nonstop. Publicists muttered in hushed tones. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Meghan herself sat in her pristine white living room, clutching her phone, scrolling through headlines that made her stomach twist. The Queen speaks from beyond the grave. Princess and to release secret recording. Royal voice recording mentions betrayal. Palace silent on who. That last one hit her like a knife. Because everyone knew. They didn't have to say her name. She could feel it in the air, that electric hum of judgment, accusation, and speculation that followed her everywhere. She had built her brand around her voice. Now, the Queen's voice, her late grandmother-in-law's, was about to drown it out. And that was unacceptable. Her team moved fast. Within minutes, crisis meetings were underway. Zoom calls were scheduled across time zones: Los Angeles, New York, London. Her head of PR, Claire, tried to keep calm as she ran through the initial plan. "First thing, we control the narrative before it controls us," she said. "We don't attack indirectly. That'll backfire. We pivot to compassion. Meghan, you're heartbroken, not angry." Meghan nodded, though her jaw clenched slightly. "Heartbroken works. I can do heartbroken." Harry sat beside her, looking dazed, his eyes dark and tired. "Do you think they'll actually name you?" Meghan turned to him sharply. "They don't have to. They've been aiming at me since that speech. And didn't just read that line for nostalgia, Harry." She wanted to make sure everyone knew who the Queen meant. Harry rubbed his temples. "It's Anne. She's always been like that. Straight, cold, unforgiving." "Unforgiving," Meghan repeated. "She's weaponizing grief. She's turning your grandmother into a weapon against us." Her voice cracked, half fury, half panic. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the buzz of incoming notifications, journalists requesting comments, PR alerts pinging like sirens. Claire cleared her throat. "Look, we can't fight the palace on sentiment. People love and people revere the Queen. If we go defensive, we lose. We have to shift tone, turn this into empathy, not conflict." "Empathy," Meghan echoed. Her voice softened. "Yes, they play power. I play emotion." She straightened her shoulders, the familiar calm returning. The actress had entered the scene again. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we do." The plan was audacious. And pure Markle. Step 1. Control the optics. Step 2. Flood the media with humanity. Step 3. Rewrite the narrative before the palace could. Within hours, a series of anonymous sources began contacting major entertainment outlets. Meghan deeply respects the Queen's legacy and hopes the recording brings comfort to those who miss her. This isn't about division. It's about remembrance. The Duchess believes love and empathy should define the Queen's story, not blame or bitterness. By morning, those quotes were everywhere, splashed across gossip sites, entertainment blogs, and even mainstream papers. But that wasn't all. A new Instagram post appeared on the Archewell Foundation page, a black and white photo of the Queen smiling softly, captioned, "Her words will always inspire compassion. May we all strive to live with grace." The message was calculated, polished, perfectly timed, and it worked, at least at first. The comments were flooded with heart emojis. Headlines shifted from "Queen targets Meghan" to "Meghan honors Queen amid tensions." For a moment, it seemed like she'd done it, turned a crisis into a halo. But the internet moves fast, and empathy has an expiration date. Because then someone noticed something. It started on Twitter. A royal historian posted two side-by-side screenshots, one of Meghan's caption and another of a similar line the Queen herself had written in a 2016 Christmas address. "Let us all strive to live with grace and gratitude." The historian asked a simple question. Did Meghan just quote the Queen to market herself? Within hours, the narrative flipped again. #Markle manipulation began trending. One user wrote, "She's quoting the Queen to protect her image. The irony writes itself." Another added, "And releases her mother's truth." Meghan releases a filtered tribute. Classic PR spin. The tide had turned, and Meghan felt it. That afternoon, she met again with her team. The polished calm was gone. Her tone was sharp now, her patience thinning. "They're twisting everything," she snapped. "We try to honor her, and they say we're manipulating. We stay silent, and they call it guilt. What do they want from us?" Harry spoke quietly. "They want distance, Meg. They want you to stop engaging." Meghan's eyes flashed. "If I stop talking, they win. They own the story." Claire hesitated before saying, "Maybe that's not such a bad thing for a while." Meghan turned on her. "Excuse me." Claire met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes silence is strategy. If you keep fighting, you confirm guilt. If you rise above, you reclaim dignity. The Queen herself mastered that." Meghan's lips tightened. "I'm not the Queen." "No," Claire said softly. "But you're being measured against her now." The room fell silent. For the first time that day, Meghan looked uncertain, vulnerable even. Because Claire was right. No matter what she said or did, she was now part of the Queen's final story. And that story wasn't hers to rewrite. But then, a new twist hit. Late that evening, a British newspaper leaked details from inside the palace. The Queen's recording includes a reference to a family member who mistook fame for fulfillment. The world exploded again. Theories. Hashtags. Commentators. It didn't matter that the palace never confirmed who the Queen meant. The implication was enough. Meghan's PR strategy crumbled overnight. Journalists swarmed outside the Montecito estate. Camera vans parked along the road. Paparazzi lenses glittered through the hedges. Inside, Meghan snapped at Harry. "They're going to crucify me again." Harry tried to comfort her, but he looked lost. "Maybe it's not about you, Meg. Maybe it's just her way of..." "Of what?" she shot back. "Scolding me from beyond the grave?" Her voice cracked, tears pooling in her eyes. "Do you have any idea how cruel that is? I loved her. I respected her." Harry didn't answer. He couldn't, because somewhere deep down, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. By the next morning, Meghan's team was in full-blown damage control. They scrambled to schedule a new interview, something humanizing, something emotional. A chance for her to speak her truth, again before the recording aired. There were talks with Good Morning America, then with Oprah, then with Netflix. But none of it came together. Every outlet wanted the same thing: to wait until after the Queen's recording was made public. The world was done listening to Meghan's truth. They wanted the Queen's. And that realization, that shift in attention, that loss of control, cut deeper than any headline. Because for years, Meghan had owned the narrative. She was the one with the voice, the platform, the spotlight. Now, the Queen, gone, silent, yet suddenly more powerful than ever, had taken it back. And had made sure of that. By the end of that week, Montecito was quiet. Too quiet. The production lights that had once filled the house with noise and purpose were dimmed. The PR calls stopped coming. The world wasn't waiting for Meghan's next move anymore. They were waiting for the Queen's. And as the release date of the recording drew near, Meghan's anxiety grew unbearable. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't think. Every day felt like a countdown. Until one evening, as she sat alone scrolling through news updates, a new headline appeared that froze her blood. Buckingham Palace confirms recording contains the word betrayal. That was it. That one word. Because no matter how much she smiled for cameras, how carefully she spoke, how much she rebranded, the Queen's voice was about to echo through time, and the world would decide what betrayal meant. And deep down, Meghan feared she already knew. But what came next, when in press play before a global audience, would expose a truth no one was prepared for. Not even Meghan Markle herself. It was a gray morning in London. The kind of morning that feels still, too still, like the air itself knows something monumental is about to happen. Buckingham Palace had been transformed into a fortress of silence. No press briefings, no leaks, no smiles, just the cold precision of history being prepared. Because that day, the world was going to hear the Queen again. Not through speeches, not through archive footage, but through her voice, unfiltered, unedited, and recorded in her final years. Princess Anne had insisted that the Queen's message be released exactly as her mother intended. No spin, no commentary, just truth. The file had been retrieved from the royal archives, sealed for years under a code name, Operation Reflection. Only 3 people had heard it in full before that day, Anne, Charles, and one trusted archivist sworn to secrecy. But soon, the world would hear it too. At precisely 10 a.m., a black velvet-covered podium was rolled into the ballroom of Buckingham Palace. Cameras lined the back of the room. Rows of journalists, historians, and royal aides filled every seat. The atmosphere was electric, reverent yet tense. And then she entered. Princess Anne, poised, silent, dressed in deep navy. She looked every bit her mother's daughter, composed, unshaken, carrying the weight of 7 decades of monarchy on her shoulders. She didn't speak immediately. She stood behind the podium, hands clasped. Then, in that calm, controlled voice, she said, "My mother believed in service above self. Her greatest fear was not that she would be forgotten, but that her life's meaning would be distorted. Today, you will hear her words, as she left them. They are not mine to interpret. They are hers alone." And with that, and nodded to the technician beside her. A finger pressed a button. The speakers crackled softly. Then came the sound of the Queen's voice. It began faintly, fragile, but steady. "If you are hearing this," she said, "then I have left my crown behind, but not my hopes." There was a collective intake of breath in the room. Even journalists leaned forward, captivated. Her tone was intimate, not regal, but maternal, like a grandmother confiding in her family. "I have lived a long life," she continued, "and I have seen much change. I have seen loyalty turned into spectacle, and kindness turned into currency. It has saddened me, but it has also strengthened my belief in one simple truth, that our value is in what we give, not what we gain." Anne's jaw tightened slightly. She had heard these words before, but they still pierced her every time. The Queen went on. "There will come a time, I fear, when the idea of duty will seem old-fashioned, when service will be replaced by self-promotion, when my image, my story, my family, will become tools for others to shape as they please." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Queen's tone grew sharper now, the soft edges giving way to firm conviction. "To those who bear my name in my blood," she said, "remember this. The crown was never a costume. It was a calling. Do not trade its honor for applause." Anne's eyes glistened, but she didn't move. Because the next line, the one that came after, was the one she dreaded most. "I have watched with love and concern," the Queen continued, "as those dear to me have struggled with their place in the world. Some have sought meaning beyond the walls of service, and I understand that. But if ever they forget the purpose of their birthright, if fame becomes their comfort and grievance their trade, then they have already abandoned what it means to be royal." The room fell utterly silent. No one moved. No one even breathed. There it was, the Queen's quiet rebuke, not spoken in anger, but in sorrow. Anne's hand trembled slightly against the podium. The Queen's voice softened again. The world will always be curious. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. But never let them own your story. Because your story is not yours alone. It belongs to those you serve. A tear rolled down someone's cheek in the front row, one of the Queen's former ladies-in-waiting. And then came the line that would echo across the world. Let my memory serve the crown, not the crown serve my memory. The sentence hung in the air like a command from heaven. But it wasn't over. There was one more passage, one the palace hadn't expected and to include. The Queen's tone grew fragile now, her voice breaking slightly. I love all my children, and my grandchildren most dearly. But love does not mean silence. It means truth. And the truth, as I see it, is that the monarchy must not become a marketplace. It must not be sold, even by those who believe they are honoring it. She paused. The faint sound of paper rustled, as if she were turning a page. I know the modern world values confession over composure. But I have learned that the more one explains, the less one is believed. The more one sells their story, the less it belongs to them. That is the tragedy of our time. Her tone softened again, a sigh between words. And so, if ever there comes a day when my life is used as currency, I ask those who remain to remember this. Not all who speak loudly tell the truth, and not all who stay silent are guilty. The crowd murmured softly. It was subtle, but it was unmistakable. That line, not all who stay silent are guilty, was the Queen's final shield for herself, and her final blow against those who had turned royal silence into Netflix content. Anne's composure cracked for just a moment. Her eyes welled up, and she looked away. The Queen's voice faded now, trembling with age but not weakness. I have nothing to forgive, she whispered. But I do have much to hope for. That my family will remember. Love is not found in headlines, but in heritage. And dignity is not in telling one's truth, but in living it. Then the audio clicked off. A long, unbroken silence followed. For almost 30 seconds, no one in the ballroom moved. No reporters shouted. No flashes went off. Even the air felt heavy, reverent. And then, the first sound came, quiet weeping, and stepped forward once more. She didn't speak immediately. When she did, her voice was low, controlled, but filled with emotion. You have heard her words. You know her heart. My mother's message was not about judgment, but about preservation, the preservation of something she spent a lifetime protecting. And that is why we chose to share this with the world. She paused, scanning the room. Her words were for all of us, especially those who carry her name. That last line landed like a thunderclap. No one missed the meaning. And across the ocean, in a sunlit mansion in Montecito, Meghan Markle froze as she watched the live stream on her laptop. Her hand covered her mouth. Her eyes filled, because there was no denying it now. The Queen's voice, the one she'd once called gracious and kind, had just drawn a line she couldn't cross. The internet erupted within minutes. Hashtag the Queen's voice. Hashtag let her words stand. Hashtag serve not sell. Millions of views. Millions of opinions. But only one sentiment dominated the conversation. The Queen had spoken, and she had spoken against exploitation, against commercializing her image, her family, her pain. Anne's decision had not just honored her mother. It had changed the game. That night, royal aides met behind closed doors to discuss the aftermath. Some celebrated the move as a triumph of truth. Others warned it would ignite war with the Sussexes. But Anne didn't care about diplomacy anymore. Her mother's voice had spoken. Her duty was done, or so she thought.